This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Hey people, welcome to Knowing Animals. My name's Siobhan O'Sullivan and I do like knowing animals. This episode of Knowing Animals is from our Protecting Animals series, where we talk to animal advocates, past and present, about the work they do for animals. Now, this episode of Knowing Animals is brought to you by ASA. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association. I'm a member of ASA. In fact, I'm a foundation member of ASA. ASA works really hard to support animal studies scholars. It runs a conference every 2 years. It has a very active Facebook page. It can let you know about upcoming conferences, calls for papers, funding opportunities. But of course, ASA also needs members. So if you're in a position to become a financial member of ASA, please think about doing so. So that's ASA, the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Now, this episode is also brought to you by the lovely people at Animal Publics. Animal Publics is part of the University of Sydney Press. It is a section of the University of Sydney Press that focuses explicitly on animal studies publications. It has numerous books already available, plus it has more in the works. So if you're in the same situation as me and most people around the world, and you are stuck at home and you need something to do, why don't you think about hooking up with the Animal Publics people, getting some of their publications and enjoying them. Okay, so this is the very first episode being recorded under the current coronavirus environment, but I'm really, really pleased to be able to bring you an old friend of mine from back in the day. So this week we're really lucky to be joined by Bede Carmody. Now, Bede is someone who I've known for many, many years. In fact, he's one of the very first animal advocates I came in contact with. So it's really, really nice to have him on this kind of trial run episode. Now, Bede will be known to most listeners and viewers who are from Australia. Bede is a long-standing animal advocate. He worked for a long time in Animal Liberation New South Wales, and he's since gone on to found A Poultry Place, which is an animal sanctuary that in particular provides a home to rescued birds. So look, Bede, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Bede, what a strange time we're living in, but it's so nice that you could join us, and perhaps it's even nicer for people that they can see you. So, yeah. Bede, can you start by telling me what inspired you to get involved in animal protection?
Wow. It really started off, and I kid you not, I made a New Year's resolution on the 1st of January 1994 that I was going to stop eating animals, and that's how it started. 6 weeks later, I was still living in Sydney at the time, and I was up in Surrey Hills attending my first ever Animal Lib monthly meeting. And I kind of walked into an office where there were these 3 people sitting around a typewriter writing a press release, and they were on page 3 of the press release. And me being a journalist, I kind of said to them, "Oh, you don't do 3-page press releases," because back in the day, it was before computers and everything else. So it was back in the day, I don't know if you remember those thermal fax machines where faxes would come through and the paper would curl up and just drop. And it's kind of like, someone's going to see maybe 1 page of this thing. Oh, that's a good story, but they've got no contact details. So you need to do press releases 1 page maximum. And that was my first meeting, and they kind of thought, who the hell is this? And I should also say, there was me and 1 other person in the room, and we were the only 2 people under the age of 50 at the time. So it was kind of like, okay, baptism of fire. So it's kind of like, that's how I got involved. Basically, I became the I suppose I started doing all the PR for Animal Lib at that time, at at that moment, just because of my journalism background.
So, B, that's a really interesting question. Like, I guess an interesting issue is, if you want to get involved, if you're someone motivated to get involved, it's kind of an interesting thing of how you insert yourself into the conversation, into the organisation, because in many ways, animal protection organisations, they need volunteers, they live and die via volunteers, but they can also be closed shops and they've got their routines and they don't know who everyone is. So how did you inject yourself into animal liberation and get involved?
I think if you ask some of the people involved at the time, they might say I just kind of forced my way in. But yeah, no, I was, I was working at the time. I was working as a journo in the New South Wales Parliamentary Press Gallery, and that was kind of cutthroat kind of stuff that I had to do. So I just kind of learned, like, I'm actually by nature quite an introvert. So it's kind of completely like when I was in that mode of, okay, this is who I am, throw out that. And since then, that was, as I said, back in 94, since then I've been working as a social change activist, and actually being paid for it for the last 17 years with the human rights organisation. So it's kind of one of those things I can switch on and switch off. And I think for anyone starting out, it's always hard to find your footing, and it's hard to find your voice sometime. And sometimes you have to go out of the comfort zone. I know, and you'd probably agree with me, in the time that I've been involved in the movement, you meet all these great people, but maybe 1 out of every 4 person is still involved for one reason or another. And I think a lot of that might be to do with the fact that they didn't feel that they were involved or engaged as much as they wanted to be. Now, whether or not that's because of the people who are there already, or whether they just didn't know how to promote themselves or do that, it's a hard question to ask. But I look back at that, I was kind of, if I can say it, I was a bit ballsy, I suppose. And I know I upset people, but it was kind of like, that's me. So.
Yeah. Well, my sense is that period was an important generational change for Animal Liberation New South Wales, and that you were involved in perhaps ushering in a new generation of advocates and also instilling a range of important changes, such as establishing the shop and changing, membership models and that kind of thing. But then you made a very bold decision, which was to leave your urban lifestyle in Sydney and go and live with the animals, or provide a home to the animals. Can you tell us about your thinking when you made that really important decision?
Yeah, look, it was, as you say, it was an interesting time, not just for Animal Live New South Wales, but across the country as well. I remember going to AGMs, and it was when Animals Australia really found their voice as well, a bit before Lynn arrived, but, Animals Australia became, it was the first time we all kind of got connected and we all started working together, which is what we kind of needed, rather than all working separately on the same 8 campaigns or whatever, but not kind of sharing, and we're all reinventing the wheel and everything. So we started that structure of kind of, hey, we've got this resource, let's all use it, So that was really interesting. And so I kind of got to the stage where, and I remember going on a rescue, and because it was away from Sydney, I stayed at the location where we brought the rescues to. And the next morning, I can remember going out there, and I kind of wanted to see what happened to them after they'd been rescued. It wasn't enough for me to kind of say, oh, I was there and we rescued 53 hens. It was kind of like I wanted to see what was going on. And luckily enough, the guys who owned the place, let me stay, and I went back a couple of weeks later and, got my hands dirty, cleaning, like doing jobs around there. And one of them then got an opportunity to work overseas for a year, but his partner didn't drive, so they needed someone who could be there who could drive. And at the time, I was negotiating to work from home, which was still up in Sydney. And I just kind of thought, well, doesn't matter whether home is, in Petersham, or does it, or can it be in a southern New South Wales town, and that's basically how it started. And then because I went from living a lifestyle that I was living in Sydney to living in a small country town and having an income, but not spending any of my money, I ended up having enough money to actually put a deposit on a block of land. And that's how it all started. And that's kind of, I got to the stage where it was kind of like, I could sit in committee meetings and talk about stuff, or I can be hands-on doing stuff. And it was the hands-on stuff that I got more joy out of.
And was it a hard decision to focus on birds, or was that okay? That was a passion, or it suited the land, or what? Why was that? How did that come about?
Okay, so that came about because I stopped eating red meat as a kid, like, 10, 12, something like that. I didn't like red meat. And that was nothing to do with, I didn't know any of the ethics about meat or anything at that stage. I just did not like red meat. And at the time when I was growing up, it was when they still had lots of fat, gristle, I think they called it, on meat, and I just didn't like it. And basically the only meat I ate was chicken, poultry. When I started working, I'd have a turkey sandwich rather than a chicken sandwich, and if I was out at a restaurant and duck was on the menu, I'd have duck, so I think in the back of my mind, it was kind of like, oh, wow, I've basically lived on poultry for so much of my life. So I think that was just a natural thing. And plus also because the first rescue I did was with battery hens, and just seeing how, because they're flock animals, and just seeing how they all, after they got to know one another, just seeing how they all kind of loved being in a group. And it was that, maybe that's a bit of me kind of thinking, oh wow, these guys all belong together, kind of thing, and they had found their own being. So I think that's kind of the mix of how it ended up being poultry.
So then, Bede, I guess the next big question is, how do you go about setting up a sanctuary? So you've got some money, you've chosen some land. I'm assuming it's not that hard to come across animals. What do you do? How do you learn? How do you even conceptualise or commence such a journey?
Yeah, I was very lucky. And I've said this, Pam Ahern, who runs Edgar's Mission, and I have done a couple of conferences in the recent years about exactly that, how you set up a sanctuary, because lots of people really want to set up animal sanctuaries. And it's kind of like, oh, yeah, okay. Take a step back first and think about it. I was lucky because I was living with Tony and Ian, and their place by proxy had become an animal sanctuary. And I really think their place is probably the first ever farmed animal sanctuary in Australia, just because of just because of how it all worked out. So I was living with them for probably about 18 months. So I kind of did a bit of an apprenticeship, and they had 10 acres. And they had some woodland and everything, whereas I bought 5 acres, which was completely barren. And the first thing I knew I had to do was plant trees. Luckily enough, my grandmother, who used to live next door to us in Westmead, she was a bit of a gardener. And as a little boy, I used to do lots of gardening with her. So I had a bit of an idea about, planting stuff. She probably wouldn't have liked the fact that I just planted natives, because she was more, a woman of her generation was more into roses and geraniums and things like that, which, aren't practical down here. And, I don't particularly like. So I just planted native trees. So I was planting little saplings, and it was all about having some shelter for everyone who lived down here. And at the time, because it was a vacant block, and Tony and Ian had horses, we brought their horses down here to graze. And, so I had these horses. I'd be planting these saplings, and these horses would be on the other side of the temporary fence, kind of thinking, oh, that looks nice. Even though they had, at that time, because, we weren't in drought, they had lots of grass to eat. It was kind of like, I'd actually like that sapling. So that was fun times. And so that's what I did. So I set it all up, and as I was planting around the property, I was thinking, okay, so if I put a fence here, because there was a dam on the property, that can be where the ducks and the geese hang out, and then the chooks can be here. And I started thinking that way. And I was lucky because I'd had the experience at Tony and Ian's place of kind of what worked, what didn't work. So, yeah.
And then one day, the phone rings, we've got some rescued battery hens. Are you receiving? Is that how it all starts? Or?
Actually, back up on that. First of all, I should acknowledge the contribution of the Australian government to setting up this sanctuary, because at the stage I had bought the property and I was paying off the mortgage, and there was no way I could afford to build the house because I just did not have any money. And then the Prime Minister at the time introduced the new home buyer scheme to boost the economy, and so the Australian government gave me, like, I think back in those days it was like $15,000 or something, because I was going to build a house, and that paid the deposit to get the house built. So I always liked the fact that the Australian government actually contributed to setting up, because by the time I was setting this place up, it was still it's one of the first couple of animal sanctuaries in Australia devoted to farmed animals, and we can thank John Howard partly for that.
What year did you buy your property?
So I did the deal in October 2000, and it settled in January 2001, and that's the day. And I hate summer, but that's the day I decided to start planting trees, and we brought the horses down here. So that's January 2001 is kind of when A Poultry Place started to exist.
Right. And so you have some money, you have some land, you have some government money, you're building a residence, and then what happens? Day one, a bird turns up, or?
Yeah. Like, it was really funny, and I and if you ever speak to Pam Ahern, she'll answer this, because when she came to visit about 2 years later, and she said, I'm looking at setting up a property, and she said, how do you get the residents? And I said, don't worry, once people know you've got a property,
they will come. Build it and they will come.
Yeah. And it really was that thing. And like, even now, like almost 20 years on, I still get all these people saying, oh, and so, yeah, okay, fine. But the thing is, when you do, there's lots of things you have to realize when you have a sanctuary. First of all is the fact that regardless of what you do, not everyone's gonna survive, because you sometimes take in beings who aren't well or aren't healthy, and that's their natural. So you just try to make them comfortable or whatever. You're also going to be inundated, and there's only so many you can say yes to at a particular time, because otherwise you then become like a hoarder. And so that's really hard to say no sometimes. That's one of the hardest things. And then it's just kind of like actually realizing that it changes your whole life. Like it completely, and I know of people who have done it going in as a couple, and it's broken their relationship. I've always been doing this on my own. Foolishly enough, I thought there might be someone who might come along eventually who wanted to do it with me. But those occasions when that's happened, that hasn't been the case, because they like the idea, but then when it comes down to the practicalities of it, it's kind of like, nah,
So, Bede, how many residents do you have there at, say, any given moment?
It usually hovers around about, anywhere between about 250 to 350. Over the years, actually now we're into this year, it's probably now just around or almost clocked over 4,000 over the 20 years that it's existed.
And so let's say you've got 300 residents there. Is that 300 birds, or is it 300 and is it 295 birds and 4 sheep and 1 pig or something like that?
So there's one human, me. At the moment, there's 11 sheep, there's 2 goats, and there's 8 cats, and the rest of them are poultry. Yeah.
So can you describe a typical day for us?
Typical day. I don't know if I've had one of them. It always changes. A typical day at the moment, and I was actually only writing about this in my journal. As I've got older, I'm waking a bit later, particularly this time of year, as we've just gone from daylight savings into non-daylight saving, and it's kind of interesting. So yeah, look, I'm usually out and about and doing stuff at the crack of dawn, literally. Particularly on the days when I need to go into the office for work, or I'm doing something else. But then on the days when I'm not, I don't have to go anywhere, and I can. I'm here at home. I can be a bit more relaxed. I'm a bit more chilled about. Okay, yep. I'm gonna let everyone out, but they it's going to be half hour later or something, and I think they kind of think, oh, okay. The thing on 2 legs is, he's obviously sleeping in or something. So they're well trained, but yeah, typical day, it really starts letting everyone out, making sure they've got feed and water, making sure everyone's okay. No one's kind of, done anything crazy overnight. And then it's kind of then just going back, seeing, what houses I need to clean out, or, if I need to order more feed or whatever, and going through those things which to me are now, because I've been doing it for so long, they're kind of standard for me. But at the start, like, you had to have the list of kind of done that one, done that one, done.
And are you able to give us some kind of perspective on what it might cost to feed 300 residents, say, a week or a day, or? Okay,
so monthly I spend on feed alone, I spend about $3,000. That's over a month, and that's particularly the last couple of years, because as I mentioned, I've got some sheep and I've got some goats, and there's been nothing in their paddocks for like 3 years. We're actually this autumn is the first autumn in 4 years where we're matching the average rainfall. Okay. So it's been really diabolical here. So I've been hand feeding the sheep for 2 years now, whereas I usually only used to have to buy hay maybe in the middle of winter or the middle of summer when they didn't have the feed. But I've been now doing that constantly for 2 years. So yeah, the bills kind of vary.
And in terms of your time, would it be, say, 4 to 5 hours a day feeding, cleaning, caring, or a bit more, or?
Yeah, okay. So a few years ago, I actually did the work-life balance thing with my paid job, and I went back to 3 days a week, because on that money, it was kind of, I was earning enough that I could pay bills and do whatever, but it also gave me more time. And it was kind of that I had a friend who was diagnosed with brain cancer. And it was just kind of like, life's too short. Like, I've done this. I now need to enjoy the experience, if you know what I mean. So I made that decision. And okay, it made things a bit harder to me, but it was kind of like, yep, I'm going to do it. So like it is something. And I know people in the past have, and people have visited me, and they're going to set up an animal sanctuary, and they expect everyone's just going to give them money to fund the sanctuary. It's kind of like, it doesn't work that way, guys. It seriously does not. And particularly, like, back in the day when I started this place, like, it was one of maybe 2 or 3 across Australia. There's now, look, I know of at least 20 or 30 that have what we call farmed animals. And, various people do various fundraisings and all that stuff. And, there's only... for someone like yourself, for example, who might live in the inner city and you want to donate to a sanctuary, it's kind of, you've got so many choices, but you've got limited dollars as well to spread around. So I think I think that's one of the things a lot of people don't realise. Like, a lot of people don't realise that people like me who run animal sanctuaries actually do still have a paying job as well.
Right. So, Bede, there's the money. There's the time. What's your advice to people who might be thinking about setting up an animal sanctuary? If you had to give them, say, key piece of advice or a couple of key pieces of advice, what would that be?
And it comes into something I'm quite professionally, I'm quite involved in as well. But like, you need to be resilient. You need to, you're having an animal sanctuary, you're going to live in the country. So, there are things called drought. There are things called fires. There are beings called snakes. There are, all those kind of things that you don't, as a city slicker, and I was, I was from the West in Sydney, and no idea what I was kind of going into. So you have to be like resilience, and a kind of, being really aware of what your tolerance and your well-being is. And I was lucky with this place. Like, when I started, like, I moved in when the house was built, and Tony and Ian's horses were still here, but I moved in, there were a rooster, 2 chickens, and 4 ducks I moved in with. And, it slowly grew as I got more confident and stuff like that. You can't just kind of, and a lot of people have that kind of, let's do a Noah's Ark kind of thing and have 2 of them and 2 of them. And you can't do everything. And of course, I've only got 5 acres here. So, and the property wasn't set up, by council bylaws. I can't have pigs here. But, apparently I could have a giraffe, because that's not, excluded. But it's kind of, you have to be realistic about what you're going to take in. And and I suppose for me, and it might differ for other people, but for me it was more also, this is my sanctuary as well. Like, it has to be something that I'm comfortable with and confident about that. Yeah. Okay.
And so, Bede, I have some cat friends. I don't have any bird friends. Do you have relationships with these animals? Are they your friends? Do they matter to you as individuals, or is it about the mission to protect very vulnerable, exploited animals? Or how do you think about the animals on your in your sanctuary?
Yeah, so I do have relationships. It was only Sunday last week. 8 days ago, one of my furry friends, because I've got the pride, I have cats, and one of the cats, Kiri, died. She just died overnight, and that was really, because they share the house with me, and they'll curl up with me and stuff like that. With the birds, it's a bit different. Like, sometimes when they've come in, particularly when they're chicks from a hatching project or ducklings from a hatching project, or 2 years ago, I think it was, 3 years ago, we had a truck rollover close here, and we had some members of the public went out and rescued all these chicks. And so I ended up having 140 chicks living in my spare room from this truck accident that apparently the council had cleaned up, and they had found them buried, and that was kind of awful, because, I knew just from my experience that a lot of them were going to die, and these people who'd brought them to me, it was kind of like I was trying to be comforting, but, just kind of had to keep warning them, look, I don't know if they're all going to survive, So you do have bonds, and with a lot of the lambs, a lot of the sheep, that are here, they've come to me as lambs, so I've been bottle feeding them and stuff like that. So you obviously develop relationships particularly when you have to treat other beings who need that kind of TLC. You're giving them feed 4 times a day, or you're giving them medication morning and night, or you're replacing bandages and stuff like that. So yeah, with those ones you do develop a bond, but then with some of the others that just come, they're just kind of like, yeah, like whatever, and I don't need everyone when I go outside. I don't need everyone to come running up to me and want pats and everything else. Like, they're living their life. I'm giving them the opportunity. All they need to do is at night, they need to go into their houses. And that's basically it. And and
basic instruction.
Yeah. And then there's kind of, there's things when I have to delouse them, or, give them some treatment or whatever. It's kind of like, okay, that's it. Like, but I don't need, everyone doesn't have to be like a lap cat, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not about me, it's about them. And providing them the opportunity to live a life which in other circumstances they wouldn't have.
Well, Bede, I ask everyone who comes on the podcast to answer 5 quick questions. Are you ready for your 5 quick questions?
I think so.
So can you recall when you first started to think that there was something wrong or problematic about the relationship between human and non-human animals?
It was actually when I started working as a journalist, and I was still a meat eater then, and one of my colleagues was a vegetarian, and it really started me thinking. And at the same time, I was still living in Sydney, and I went to Gould's bookshop on King Street there, and I bought this book, and I forget the actual name of it, but it was by Christine Townend, who founded Animal Lib. And I just started reading it, and I'd always loved animals as a kid and everything else, but I'd never made that connection between what was on my plate and how it was produced. And that for me was kind of, I can't do this anymore.
Wow, well, that's great to hear a book having that impact. How wonderful. Can you recall the first thing you did to try and bring about change for animals?
I think it was back when I was a kid. And we had, I grew up in Westmead, which is a Western Sydney suburb. And we had lots of older neighbours. And the neighbour across the street from us, Mrs. Parker, had taken in this old, a homeless cat who, was pregnant, ended up having kittens. And we ended up adopting one of the kittens. But I can remember, and I was in year 2 or 3 or something. So this is, I was maybe 7 or 8. And I can remember going over, I'd come home from school and I'd go over and help her, and because she was nursing this mother cat, and Mrs. Parker must have been in her 80s or something at that stage. And so I would go and help her feed them and look after them. And so that's the real first memory I have of doing something. We had a dog in the backyard who was always my best friend. I can remember as a little kid I'd talk to Lady a lot. But yeah, that's
Wonderful. If you had to name one animal advocate who's had a big impact on you, who would it be?
Oh, well, I can definitely say it would be a woman, because in in the animal rights movement, like this, in all social change movements, there seems to be lots more proactive females than males. I have to say that in my experience. And I'm not being sexist or anything about that. But look, yeah, I mentioned Christine Townend before, but I would have to say, if I had to choose someone, I'd say Linda Stoner, who I remember, I had grown up being an Aussie kid, I'd grown up seeing her on TV in her various TV roles. But one of the first things I did with Animal Lib, we had a stall at a festival down at Darling Harbour, and this is back in 94. I think it was called Mind, Body, Spirit, or some festival like that. And I was doing the stall with Linda. And I was kind of like, oh, wow, and by this time I'd been working as a journalist, so I had interviewed, celebrities, known people, former prime ministers and stuff like that. But I was so excited that, I'm doing a stall with Linda Stone. And she was just so, that first meeting, she was just so genuine and just so kind of just Linda. And it started, what has now become, what year are we now? What, 26 years of friendship, and just that she was this celebrity, but she wasn't like, it was just kind of, she was a genuine person who cared about these issues, and I think that always gave me, I think that's kind of what bedded me down in kind of like, you have to be, there are going to be some people who will agree with us on things, and there's going to be other people who kind of just vehemently disagree. It's kind of okay, like you just can't force your thoughts down their throats. And I think that was particularly that first afternoon I spent with Linda. It was kind of, oh, okay, this is how you do it. Okay,
lovely. Well, big shout out to Linda. So what's the most important thing animal advocates can do for animals?
I think just going back on that last point, just being a voice for them, but also realising, you can be an advocate, but then you can also become a zealot. And I think finding that balance is really tricky for some people. And, we all have to remember, like, I was almost 25 before I stopped eating meat. Yeah, so that I can now say I've not been eating animals for half of my life, but it took me some time to actually. So it takes people. It's a journey, and so you can't be, if you want to be effective, you have to actually, you've gone through your own journey, so learn the lessons that you've learned, and adopt them how you do it with other people as well. Just don't become that kind of you should be vegan tomorrow kind of thing.
So, Bede, if you had the power to change one thing about the human, non-human animal relationship, what would it be?
It would be, and when a few years ago I did a TEDx talk, and one of the things, the reason why I was invited to do it, and I've never found out who jobbed me in to begin with, but the reason why I was invited to do it was they wanted to find out why someone would have an animal sanctuary devoted to poultry, because most people, when they think of an animal sanctuary, they think of wildlife or they think of dogs and cats. And so I was asked to do this TED talk about why does someone have an animal sanctuary devoted to poultry. And I think for me, it's just kind of just getting that respect up there, because, people, and I live in a country town, people, continually feed their dogs and cats and stuff, but they won't, once their chickens go off the lay, and chickens will only lay basically for about 18 months of their whole life, which is a bit, unrealistic anyway. But once they don't lay eggs, they no longer want to, foot the bill to pay for the feed or anything, because they're not getting an egg back. But yet they're still, feeding the cat or the dog. And it's kind of, so it's just respect for poultry. That's, I mean, if I could do anything, and if I've done anything in the time I've been doing this, if I've changed one person's attitude towards poultry, that's a win.
Oh, good on you, Bede, and I'm absolutely sure you have. So, Bede, what are you working on next? Is it for you, it's just about continuing the work you're doing, or do you have ambitions for the sanctuary? Or
one of the things I need to do, and maybe if we're lucky, the drought might be breaking. There's lots of drought damage that I need to repair. Like there's been, I planted over 700 trees when I started here, and over the years, they've fallen over, particularly with drought and stuff like that. So there's lots of that kind of maintenance work I need to do. People always say to me, "Oh, are you going to expand or whatever?" It's kind of no. I've been here, done that, and at the time I was 20 years younger, I was 20 years fitter. No, this is it. Look, I don't necessarily have any plans. I've been on and off. I've been playing around with a manuscript about my life and having a sanctuary and stuff like that. So that's a work in progress and has been on and off for a number of years. So that's something I would like to see come to fruition one day. But apart from that, it's kind of like, and just trying to educate people. The fact is, now in this region, we've got so many other sanctuaries as well. We can now all share the load a bit as well. So it's kind of like, if I can't help someone, it's trying to find someone who can help them, and being that kind of conduit.
So, Bede, I'm sure that there'll be people who will be listening to this podcast or watching this on YouTube who will be inspired and will want to make a donation. How can people find out about A Poultry Place and engage?
Okay, so Facebook is, I'm a bit of a Luddite, so the only social media I do is on Facebook. So if they go to Facebook and type in A Poultry Place, they'll find the page, and all the information is in the About section or the Info section. And if not, they can just email me direct, freechook@bigpond.com. And alternatively, they can always go on YouTube and just put my name in, and my TEDx talk will come up.
Fantastic. And this episode of Knowing Animals will come up.
And amongst some other embarrassing interviews as well. But anyway.
Well, Bede, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to the listeners for joining us for Knowing Animals, the podcast where we speak to academics and animal advocates about the work they do for animals. And you can find us on the internet at Facebook Knowing Animals, Instagram Knowing Animals, Twitter Knowing_animals. And finally, I should say that I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan, and I do like knowing animals. For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.